Welcome to our first responders panel. We have about 20 minutes for a session of discussion here featuring 6 individuals, leaders in their respective UU organizations. 20 minutes means about 2 minutes each to start off with. So panelists, after about 2 minutes, you'll hear a ping. You should wrap up then, and then we expect to have a couple more minutes afterwards to reflect on one another's comments. So since the bios and names and organizations information are all in the program booklet, I won't read those. So what we'll do is go with this series. We will go with beginning with Adam Wasserman, UUs for a Just Economic Community, Katia Hansen, UU Rise, Josh Leach, UU Service Community, then Everett Thompson, Side with Love, Laura Wagner, Coalition of UU State Action Networks, Doris Marlin, UU Ministry for Earth. So again, about 2 minutes to start off with for each of our 6 panelists. You'll hear a ping. Then with time remaining, we will come back and talk a little bit more about some of these critical issues that the Congressman has spoken to. So let's get underway. Let's begin with Adam Wasserman.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Just want to make sure. Good. So first I want to say I'm speaking to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I send you greetings from the UU congregation of Santa Fe and other UUs out here in the West. I will say until 2 years ago, though, I lived in Northern Virginia, in Vienna, and I was very happy to work closely with UUSJ for many years and participate in their work. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to be back here speaking to this community. So just one thing, I'll tell you one takeaway from what we heard from Congressman Connolly is that this is no time to take our foot off the pedal. This is no time to relax, much as we might like to. Things are going to be very close on the political scene in terms of getting things done. So our work and our efforts are as important as ever, if not more so. So let me say a few words about UUs for a Just Economic Community. I'm a board member. This is a national network of UUs that work on economic justice issues. And, the UUSJ asked us to think about our questions of accountability. And that's an interesting perspective. And there's sort of 2 sides to this for our organization. There's who do we hold accountable and who are we accountable to? So if I say who do we hold accountable, we look to people in positions of authority who have impact on economic justice for better or worse, elected officials, government officials, members of the business community, thought leaders who we want to influence to try to do the right thing or to do more or not do the wrong thing. And we do that through partly by working with UUSJ. As Bob mentioned, we have had a practice of holding conferences. We've held 2 of them now in Washington on key issues of inequality and healthcare. We held one last year on the Green New Deal. And these culminated in going up to the Hill in coordination with UUSJ to sort of deliver messages directly to members of Congress. And we have focused issues that we try to do this on. Climate justice is one, healthcare is another that we've worked on intensely for the past several years. We also are accountable to our fellow UUs. I mean, we're a UU organization, we are hold accountable our fellow UUs and our congregations and the UUA. We work with at GA. We regularly introduce AIWs. We introduced one this year on the economic aspects of the COVID crisis. We had a workshop on reparations, which we hope to reprise in the coming year. And just briefly, we are accountable to our fellow UUs, and we ground our work in our moral and spiritual values. And last but not least, we are accountable to those who are the victims of economic injustice, frontline communities, communities of color, the working class of America. And we want to make sure that in our UU work, on all of the other interconnected justice issues, that these questions of economic equality and economic justice are kept front and center. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Adam. Sounds like a 360-degree level or type of accountability. So I think that's a good way to think about it. Okay, thank you, Adam. Now let's move on to Katia Hansen from UU Rise. Are you there?
I am. Good afternoon, or it's afternoon here. My name is Katia Hansen, and I proudly serve as the president and CEO of URISE, UU Refugee and Immigrant Services and Education. And I am coming to you from Oceanside, California, which is on the unceded land of the Kumeyaay and Luiseño peoples. Like UUJEC, we recognize that our role is to hold people accountable as well as to be accountable. URISE does direct practice immigration legal services, as well as working with congregations and working with organizations around the United States to deepen and broaden their work on immigrant justice. So we do larger policy level as well as direct practice. And one of the things that has really taught us is that there's a difference between holding people accountable, being held accountable ourselves, and being in accountable relationships. And how do we really work to be an accountable relationship? Just speaking of in the sense of immigration, I think that it's really important to recognize that as we are holding electeds and appointed and hired leaders accountable, we have to know where that accountability is coming from. And that accountability can't be coming from URISE. That accountability needs to be coming from the communities we work with, who we sometimes represent, and whose voices we ideally are always lifting up and forwarding. The hardest part about that, of course, is that immigrants are not a monolith. And when we're looking at legislation, there's often immigrants who are in favor of one form of legislation and immigrants who are opposed to that same bit of legislation. So how do we develop an understanding of accountability? And for us, it's through relationship building. It is by sitting and recognizing that sometimes we have to go with we have to take the path that the majority of our constituents are hoping for. Sometimes we're working on a path that is kind of evenly split, but we're working with those communities where we have relationship. Our job is not, and never has been, to speak for the voiceless. Our job is to pass the mic when we have it. And our job is to make sure that voices are lifted, and those who haven't been listening to the impacted communities have an opportunity to hear those voices. I really appreciate the fact that Representative Connolly is trying to look at the broader spectrum of accountability. And I'm really hopeful that all of our partners here are doing the same work, where we're looking at not only how do we hold accountable, but how do we hold ourselves accountable, and where does that accountability come from? So I think that's about my time, but I didn't hear the bell, so.
Thank you, Katia. And I think in particular, thanks for calling our attention to the fact that immigrant groups are not monolithic. And I think it really calls for us to engage in a deeper understanding of our moral owners. And sometimes there are conflicts, but we need to have a better understanding so we don't appear to be representing groups that we really cannot do for lack of full understanding and our own accountability. So thank you, Katia. Let's move on now to Josh Leach, UU Service Committee, with whom we've had a good working relationship on writing letters to members of Congress on a number of UUSC issues, including immigration, including the environment and the like. Josh, you there?
Thank you so much, Bob. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for all the inspiring words we've heard today. It's really an honor to follow our colleague Katia at URISE, because this shared work for migrant justice and refugee solidarity is also very near and dear to UUSC's mission. So the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, where I'm currently working as a policy analyst, is a human rights organization that's inspired by UU values. And issues of migration and refugee rights specifically have been central to our work since our founding. As folks may know, we were originally started in 1939 as a UU effort to aid Jewish refugees and political dissidents who were escaping from Nazi-occupied Europe. And today we continue to partner with people around the globe who've been displaced from their homes. So as refugee advocates, we're definitely excited about what Congress may be able to achieve in the coming term. And I'm very appreciative of Representative Connolly for sharing some insight into the legislative agenda ahead. And we're also grateful for the commitments we've heard from the incoming executive branch. Both President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have told us that they intend to restore refugee and asylum in this country, which have been decimated by the policies of the outgoing administration. As encouraging as all of this is, however, we also recognize that we've been here before, not very long ago. The Obama administration made many pledges on immigration and human rights and fulfilled many of them, but they also fell woefully short in certain regards, reopening family detention centers, deterring people from seeking refuge, and outsourcing the dirty work of blocking asylum seekers to regional neighbors. So as much as we hold out hope for new leadership in Washington, we recognize the vital importance of what our colleagues have asked us to consider today, namely accountability. Commitments from politicians are only the beginning of the work, and it is what they do after taking office that really counts. In this regard, I think we can draw two different lessons from recent history. The first lesson is that individual character matters. It matters whom we elect to public service and the integrity they bring to the work. We've learned this the last 4 years if we didn't know it before. The second lesson, however, is slightly at odds with this. It could best be summed up by the phrase path dependence. Even though our elected officials make a difference as individuals, their choices are constrained in part by the actions of their predecessors. So as we enter this era of new leadership in the White House, we can see both of these truths in action. It matters that the incoming administration has made commitments to uphold human rights, and the legacy of past administrations is going to haunt even their best intentioned efforts. The Biden-Harris team will inherit an immigration detention system that locks up thousands of people every year, including families with children. They will inherit an offshore military detention base at Guantanamo Bay that still has not been closed. And they will inherit a massive humanitarian crisis at our borders caused by the Trump administration's decision to grind our asylum system to a halt. Overcoming these challenges is going to require more than just goodwill. It's going to require overcoming path dependency. But as we just said a minute ago, individual will and path dependency pull in different directions, constraining each other. And so what's left to break the stalemate? And I think the answer is clear, that it's all of us here on this call, all of us working together as people fighting for justice. By forming a constituency for human rights, we can provide that needed counterweight to break the inertial force of the status quo. I believe that's all my time, so I will wrap it up there.
Thank you, Josh. Your comments bring to mind one of the things that the congressman said about having their backs. And while we think of accountability to hold our elected officials accountable, sometimes having their backs, that is supporting them in ways, whether it's generating letters or whether it is making sure that our values and voices are elevated in their offices so they know where we stand. I think that's an important part, and I hope we have a chance later to talk more about that, because it kind of works two ways. So thank you, Josh. Now let's move on to Everett Thompson, who runs Side with Love. Everett, are you there?
I am here, and
Fantastic.
I don't run Side with Love. Y'all run Side with Love, and I get the opportunity to facilitate the conversation internally, but also externally. And my main role is to make sure that our principles and values of UUism is being seen in the way that we act, in the way that we practice, in the way that we have relationships with one another, and also with the community writ large. So I just want to say thank y'all to UUSJ for making this an opportunity for Side with Love to side with you and to celebrate you, because y'all are a part of us and I am a part of you as well. I'm also love all y'all, inclusive y'all. So I just want to say that I'm from, of course, I'm from the South, and I'm actually here on Muskogee Cree territory. So just want to uplift the continual fight, but also the continual thriving of our people. A couple of things I just want to hit on real quickly. Katia was really great at talking about the immigrant community not being a monolith. UUs are not a monolith. And so within our body, we also have folks who are on the margins. We also have folks who are immigrant identified, or who are LGBT identified, who are underemployed, who are all of these things, who are Black, brown. And so when we're thinking about who are we fighting for, we're actually fighting with and for the higher ideals of what it means to have inherent dignity and worth. So what does that mean for us as a body politic, and how is that articulated when we're fighting on the front lines and on the main lines, and also in our congregations? It means that our faith is not just these words that's on paper, but it's actually how do we articulate it, and how do we actually make it be in right relationship in a way that allows us to actually create policy that goes beyond, the whims of who's elected, create systems that goes beyond the whims of when we feel like we want to be accountable to them or not, and create a reciprocity beyond the whims of our own convenience or not. It is a higher ideal that we're moving toward. And it's not just for now, but it's for generations to come. And when I was listening to the representative speak, what resonated with me was a lament. How long, my God, how long must we suffer from whether or not you want to play well with us or not? How long must we hope and believe that you will do something that you feel like is not in your best interest, yet you're sacrificing us for your seat or for something else? How long must we hope that the realization of justice in our lifetime, so our children don't have to deal with this? Do we have to concede when we know, how do we concede, but also have to actually say the characteristics of the win has all the characteristics of the loss? So I just want us to really think about, what are we really asking? And what are we really moving on? And what are we really going forward? I still got a couple of minutes. The last piece I want to say is, I actually have a prayer for us to gird ourselves and to really think about that our work is not just, our work is the work of our internal pieces and external pieces. Our work is also this piece of, how do we really understand our proximity to make pressure, our proximity to change not just the external ecosystem, but the internal in our own relationship system, which means there's some work that has to happen as a full thread, so that like our biases that show up everywhere else, and that we only think shows up when Trump is in office. Trump is a manifestation of what has always been here. The pandemic is a manifestation of the lack of access to healthcare, and that those who have always been on the bottom will always die first, and we will sacrifice them because that's what we do. So I just don't want us to think that this is a situation that just came about. We have created this situation, and we have an opportunity with compassion, and love means that we struggle to do something different, and we struggle with each other. And sometimes we don't get mad at each other. I get mad at people all the time. And it is through love and compassion that we can sit and make something right, and right alignment, not just with each other, but with the movement at large, because we are worth that. All of us are worth that. So thank y'all. I look forward to all the ways that we play together. May God continue to bless you and keep you through all our days.
Thank you, Everett, and also for reminding us that UUs are not monolithic. In fact, I recall a conversation with our new minister at UU Church of Arlington, Amanda Poppy, a couple months ago, when she reminded us that as we keep invoking Brian Stevens's notion about getting proximate, we don't have to go far away. There are people in our own communities, people who are suffering injustices, or the collision or collusion of multiple injustices. So we need to have a better understanding of that. So thanks for your comments on that. Let's now move to Laura Wagner, head of Kusan. Laura?
Excellent, thank you. So happy to be following Everett. Love you. So Kusan is a coalition of state action networks. We have about 24, and I'm just, coming up with just the ideas are flowing, listening to everybody today. There's so much, I think, it's sort of a microcosm of what happens in our congregations, where sometimes we get too insular and we decide we want to figure out what the problem is, what the solution is, and kind of work on our own way. And state action networks were born from, okay, we don't have any power. When we do that, we have to actually work together to build power. And when I think about how we hold in legislators accountable, we're building power. So they need to be nervous. Oh, if the UUs show up, I better do what I said I was going to do. And we only do that by getting connected, getting organized, and really understanding power dynamics and how this works, and being side by side, like Everett said, with the people who have already been fighting and suffering the most for generations, and centering those voices in the center of what we're doing. And I think we were starting to get some traction on a state action network level with, we built some beautiful connections around immigrant accompaniment networks. I think we were starting to get some traction on ending cash bail. But at the beginning, it was kind of like hard to say, well, Massachusetts isn't Arizona, isn't Texas. How do we do stuff together? It was like hard to figure it out a little bit. But then I think UU the Vote really broke through for what does that look like to do this? And hey, it helps to have a little like integrated support from the top down to the grassroots, guys, and a little bit of money to back that up, and commitment. And like, I'm so done with resolutions. We need to show up with our bodies and our actions. And I'm, no more writing down what we think is right. We need to do it and show up. And if we're there with our partners, we're not there questioning, oh, I think you should do it this way. And is this really what the problem? No. The people on the front line is saying, we need you to show up, we need you to do this. And our job is to get organized, educate ourselves, and show up and say, okay, we're here. And it was just so beautiful seeing that through UU the Vote. And we're going to keep it going through Georgia. And I'm thinking, man, we have to do that. What would that look like on ending solitary? I'm hearing, the police, obviously, front and center. Use of deadly force, things like qualified immunity, but it happens every day in our prisons and jails, and it's not making the front page of the paper when people suffer for decades in solitary confinement and are fed food with insects in it and feces, and that never makes the news, and that happens every day, and we're all paying for that, and that has to end too. And we have to start working together. This is too hard for any one group to solve. And in Massachusetts, we've been really making progress because we're working with the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. So we have a national parliament, Unlock the Box, and we've learned so much because it's really complicated. So we're learning from other states, and it's totally transformed our campaign. And we need to figure out how to do this between state action to state and really identify these things. And like environmental justice, there are sacrificial people in places everywhere. And we have to figure out how do we stop that, and how do we stop being quiet and turning our backs and allow it to happen. And immigrant rights and things like decriminalizing marijuana. It starts to get complicated sometimes when you get down the weeds and writing legislation, and what does it look, what is actually successful, where are those pressure points? And then we don't have time for learning curves right now. We have to learn from each other and speed that up and do it together. And it's just so exciting to think about and the possibilities. And First Nation rights, I think, Massachusetts, I think, now has the dubious honor of having the most racist, horrific flag left in the country. Like, starting to see, look, when other states start getting stuff done, that's got to help get momentum in your state too, and really seeing that, the bedrock of our original sin in this country, and how do we address that? How do we see that liberation, mutual liberation, everybody's liberation would tie together? We can't do this alone. And it's so exciting to think about that. And I hope UUs have crossed that threshold, and we understand what it means to build power and work together and show up, and not always have to be the loudest, smartest person in the room. How to show up and learn and listen and do sometimes what you're asked to do. So it's a very exciting time. And the partnership with UUSJ is wonderful because we are focused at a state level, but having that connection with what's happening at the federal level, I think the synergy around all this is really exciting right now. So thanks. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be able to be part of State Action Networks and part of the Kusan team, and just so excited to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for giving us the cue about showing up, living, learning, moving on, and doing what we need to do and modifying our stances as necessary. So thank you for that. Now our sixth panelist, Doris Marlin, representing UU Ministry for Earth. Doris.
Thank you. Yes, I am a board member with UU Ministry for Earth. I am also an advocacy corps member with UUSJ and longtime member and sometimes leader of the environmental and climate justice group here in the DC area. I'm a member of All Souls Church here in Washington, DC. So UU Ministry for the Earth, part of our mission statement is practical support for bold, accountable action for climate and environmental justice. And that, of course, includes the relationships, many of which we have with the organizations here today. Within UUMFE is the Create Climate Justice networking tool to build the UU climate justice movement within our denomination and to connect to everyone else. Yes, relationships, accountability, absolutely. Another effort within UU Ministry for the Earth is Harvest the Power, where we recently had a program rethinking Thanksgiving and how our colonial roots have contributed to many of the problems of today. Appreciating what Congressman Connolly said about the Paris Climate Agreement. I want to thank him for acknowledging that. Not only has UUSJ, the UUA, UU Ministry for the Earth, and at least 20 other UU organizations have signed on to the 5th anniversary reaffirmation of the agreement, and which is now having a greater emphasis on justice, health, equity. And it's also the basis for a campaign that I lead, the Strengthen Local Climate Commitment campaign, where we hold our representatives accountable for the climate and environmental justice plan they are supposed to be implementing in local communities. And there's much more to that program. So lastly, I want to do a post-election reflection about showing up. And I did partisan work in Florida and Georgia, and I don't think I mistook the relief spoken through the body language of the people of color that I stood beside with them in very divided communities at the polls, while my white neighbors, their white neighbors, cast their votes alongside them in a very divided community. So in closing, I just want to quote John Kerry. The Paris Climate Agreement won't solve the climate crisis, but the climate crisis will not get solved without the Paris Climate Agreement. At the basis of that statement is relationships. It is the strength of our relationships that will be the only path forward with all of us working together. And lastly, to quote an American author, Claire Vane Watkins, we no longer have the luxury of future tense anymore. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doris. Those are good words, important words to close on. Regrettably, this panel is out of time. Thank you all 6 people, Adam, Katia, Josh, Everett, Laura, and Doris, for your thoughtful comments. And we'll now go to transition and move on to the second panel. So thank you to the first panel for being our first responders, if you will.